when I was doing a bit of research for my book, I got talking to Frank Doggett, and on one afternoon we were standing up having a bit of a yak, and he said, yeah, well, we got a bit of a stir when the Japanese arrived at Broome, and I said, were you there? And he said, yeah. And I said, sit down and start talking. So Frank gave me a complete rundown on him and Captain Snook and an army bloke by the name of Clifford, who'd just flown in. They were only on the ground for about 3/4 of an hour when the Japanese aircraft came over. They went to some slit trenches at the back of the hangar, and from there they noticed that there was flames and smoke coming from in front of the hangar, and it was his Stinson going up in flames. On the subject of air raids in Western Australia, I got an email from Alan Mitchell yesterday. Alan was on the ground at Exmouth in 85 Squadron, and he gave me a rundown on what aircraft took off, who was flying them, boomerang aircraft. He went on to say that some people came out of their tents only partly robed, with a tin hat on, running around, not quite knowing what to do. And the pilots got some pretty good surprises once they got airborne. But no one was hurt. Murray Fletcher, would you like to come forward? Murray was an 8-year-old living in Port Hedland when the Japanese arrived. His father was the Sergeant of Police in Port Hedland. So Murray is our eyewitness today. Do we have any other eyewitnesses? Anyone on the ground while these raids were taking place?
I was there.
You were up in a boomerang?
I was flying boomerangs up there with 85 Squadron.
Right, okay. So we've got 2 eyewitnesses.
I'm not going to elaborate on what we've just heard. We've just heard a wonderful rendition of a clinical historian report on the air raids. And I wouldn't be expected to, at 8 years old and 9 years old, to be able to refute or even support some of the things that Kevin's told us about. That was in 1945. Now that's a pretty smart looking young fellow, isn't it? That was actually that was taken after the war was over. We were moved to Port Hedland in Christmas 1942. Christmas 1941. 114 degrees. We stepped off the Kalinda, and what I'm going to try and just give you a bit of an idea of the conditions that the civilian population put up with up there in those days. When I say put up with, they really didn't think anything of it, because what you haven't had you don't miss. We arrived Christmas 1941, 114 degrees. My dad had just been transferred in as the officer in charge of, he wasn't a sergeant by the way, he was a constable at that time, and it was a 2-man police station. The junior policeman was still there, and Dad arrived there with he's a recent divorcee with 4 little kids, the youngest 3 years old and the oldest 10, and he was going into this, what was a fairly dicey situation for civilians, and particularly with a young family. But one of the things that made it very acceptable to him was that he was the guy in charge, and he was a long way from the bosses, and it gave him a chance to look after his kids. We've got a store. I've got a picture. Where's the gadget?
There it is.
Oh, yeah, just that was our house, and you'll notice that it's really just 3 rooms.
The central one is the one.
Okay. It's just 3 rooms, side by side. On this end, with a veranda right around. Now you can't see it there, but halfway up the veranda was lattice work. And then there were these very large shutters, and then in the middle of each shutter was a little shutter. And I never ever saw those shutters closed in all the years that we lived in that house. That house, by the way, is still been shifted out to the industrial area. It's still being used. Interesting design, the house. There was a bedroom on each end of the three rooms. They had walls. The lounge was just fly wire, and you could actually stand here in the front of the house, in behind the fence, and you could look right through into the backyard, because there was lattice on this end, lattice the other end, with fly wire walls. The fly wire, I might tell you, had been there for quite a long time, had some pretty big holes in it, and mosquitoes and sandflies could go through in formations of 1,000, no problem. So much so that on a spring tide, Dad used to load us into his ute, and we'd go out and sleep out where out where South Hedland is now. By the way, the population was 240 people official, 243 or something. But remember that a lot of those were young people who were at the war, so you could shoot a gun down the street and not hit anyone most times. When we went there, we had no refrigerator. We had no electric fan. Not that an electric fan would have been much good to you, because a lot of you will know the name Len Taplin. Well, Len Taplin was a very well-known fighter pilot of the First World War, and he was one of Brearley's men who started up the flying, the mail to Derby, to Derby or wherever it was. But Len, when he retired from flying, active flying, commercial flying, he went to Port Hedland, and he ran the electricity supply. And his wife refused to allow the electricity engine to run after 12 o'clock at night. So at 12 o'clock everything went black, and 6 o'clock in the morning you'd go and start the old diesel up and you'd have electricity again. So if you had a fan, it wouldn't have helped you very much. It also was very difficult when they were unloading the ships. The Calinda was the only ship that was on the line which had refrigeration in it. So it came in every 6 weeks with fresh supplies. After that, after 2 or 3 days, all your salads and all were gone, and we then lived on potatoes and onions until the Calinda came again in 6 weeks' time. And when they would come in on a high tide, and none of them would stay after another tide came in. If you weren't finished unloading, off they went and they took all your goods with them. And of course, no lights at night. If it was at night time, the ship had to supply the lighting and the power to do the unloading, so they didn't always get unloaded. Len Taplin also decided that if the Japs came, they were going to get a bit of a reception. So, and I don't know how, but he got hold of an anti-aircraft gun, and he mounted it in his backyard. Now, he had this anti-aircraft gun and he had some ammunition for it, so no doubt, he was pretty keen on giving the Japs a bit of a reception. But the village fathers warned him that whatever happened, unless the Japanese actually tapped the town, was he to unleash his might on the Japanese, and so they never really did attack the town, in my memory anyway. And so poor old Len never got to use his Orlican or whatever it was he had there. You might remember a story about Len Taplin while we're talking about when he was flying for Brearley. One of the aircraft, the tourers that they were using, broke down in Derby, and there happened to be one sitting on the ground in Port Hedland, so they rang Len and said, bring that other aircraft up because this aircraft broken down and we've got to get the mail out of here. So Len flew this aircraft up to Derby, and unfortunately there was a passenger book to go on it back to south. And Len wasn't very happy about this because the next night he had a date in Port Hedland. So I'm sure many of you will have seen the famous photo. Len sat on the wing with his feet either side of his legs either side of one of the struts, and there he did the flight back as a third passenger from Derby to Port Hedland, and he made it for his day. In our house, there was 5 of us lived with probably 1.5 million cockroaches. The town was absolutely full of cockroaches, and if you got up to go for a twinkle at night, you had to have a torch and you had to shine it on the floor to give the cockroaches a chance to disperse, or if you didn't, every step you took you crunched on a cockroach. Now it was okay, you could go to the light, switch the light on before 12 o'clock and then just stand there and give them a chance to get away, but of course after 12 o'clock you had to have that torch or you were crunching cockroaches all the way to the bathroom. The aviation activity really at that stage wasn't very much, there wasn't a great deal there. I know the Air Force had a wonderful Tiger Moth there. We had various aircraft arrived and departed for short periods of time, but there weren't a great deal of air support there. There was the Flying Doctor Service was using a Dragon Rapide for a lot of the time and a Fox Moth a lot of the time after it was rebuilt, after it was destroyed at a cyclone in 1939. That Fox Moth is owned by one of our members here today. He's got that beautifully restored and that's still part of the West Australian scene, and it was the first aircraft ever owned by the Flying Doctor Service.
Murray, Harold Dix took that down to Marble Bar to get it away from the Japanese.
Yeah.
And then the Marble Bar Flying Doctor Service started up there.
Yep.
And Harold was so aggressive, told me he had to certify a fellow in Broome who was hiding under a bed and was killed by shrapnel.
Yeah, I think that was the one from Port Hedland, John.
Port Hedland.
Yeah, Adams, who was the story that I heard, and I don't intend to. The story I heard that they were under the bed in their tent, and one of them had a bottle of beer. And this is the story which went around, and he thought, well, I can't get a drop any of that beer if I'm under my bed. So he stood up to jump under the other guy's bed, and the shrapnel hit the tent pole and took his head off or did the damage. You know, who knows what is the truth? I'm sure Kevin would have a better idea than me, but that was the story that went around in our day. They were the people of the Norwest were very adaptable and resourceful, none more than my dad. Now, as you can imagine, 4 little kids to look after. He couldn't afford to go away out of town for very long, and so he was lucky that he had, for most of the time, a junior policeman who he'd send off out to do the dirty work in the bush. Anyway, came a time when the junior policeman was transferred elsewhere, and because of the war there were none to replace him. So Dad found himself there on his own. So everything went well until a fellow drilled into a unexploded charge over at Yep. And Dad had to go off and sort that little lot out. And what was he going to do with his kids? So, not to be outdone, he put on his wide-brimmed hat and marched around to the Pier Hotel There was a gentleman, I'll call him Tom, that was his first name, I won't say his second name because some of you people might have known him. But Tom was at the hotel at 11 o'clock in the morning, was there until it closed at 11 at night, and that was every day, sitting in the same place, sitting on the same seat. So Dad went round and said, Tom, your health is in danger, I think it's time you had a bit of a spell. So I marched him round to the local JP, who was also the harbour master, the lighthouse keeper, the register of birth, deaths and marriages, the mining registrar, the register of titles, and any other state or public job that was needed to be done in Port Hedland. Bert Clark did it. He was also a very good watchmaker in his spare time. And Dad said to Mr. Clark, Bert, this gentleman is in dire straits as far as his health is concerned. I think he needs to go on the wagon. So Bert said, yes, all right, Les, how long are you going away for? And he said, 3 weeks. He said, okay, Tom, you've got 3 weeks in the lockup to dry out for the good of your health. Tom took over the police station. He took the telephone calls. He renewed firearm licences and motor vehicle licences, and he cooked for us 4 kids and saw us off to school each day and saw us back after school. Tom did that duty a number of times until finally we got an incumbent guy who could do it for him, and that was a guy who was charged with manslaughter. He got into a fight, knocked the other bloke down, he hit his head on a rock and he died. So Mr. Kelly was charged with manslaughter. He was given a year in jail, and because of the tyranny of distance, you know, the aeroplane used to take 3 days to get to Port Hedland. You know, it was pretty hard getting around in that country. And so it was decided he would do his time in jail in Port Hedland. So he took over from Tom. When Dad went away, he took over the police station, looked after us kids, and he was a great guy. The police had anything extra duties that had to be done that there was no one else to do. The police had to do it, because they were sort of part of the network of support for that area. And one of the things was the undertaker. We didn't have an undertaker there. So Dad had to buy his own supply of coffins. So he bought an assortment, starting from a large one and getting smaller and smaller, which were stacked inside one another, until the top one was only a small one. He used to keep his tools in that one with a cup on it. And so so I remember one particular very well-known Port Hedland identity passed away. He was a big man, so unfortunately he had to unload everything to get the bottom coffin out, which he did, and he borrowed the four-wheel drive from the PMG department. That was the hearse. Threw the coffin on the back, and myself and my friend sat on the coffin while we went off up the street to go and collect the occupant. So when we got there, of course, we had to get in the front of the truck, and they carved the coffin out and then brought it back much heavier than when it went in, and put it on the back of the truck. And the truck was then parked outside our house for a few hours until he got the call from the road board to say that the hole had been dug. And so then he just rang the people, the next of kin, and said, okay, quarter of an hour, we'll be on our way. And out they went, and they popped him in the hole, and the road board filled the hole in, and Dad went back and delivered the truck back and went back into the office. So that's the sort of things that these people did up there, and thought nothing of it. It was just part of life. It was part of the Norwest, and you know, that was life. So there's a couple of points I might say to you, Kevin. A very good friend of mine who I played golf with for many years was actually in Port Hedland standing on the jetty while the attack was taken. And there's two things that he told me, that he was a policeman, and he and another policeman did find the body of that Japanese pilot, and they buried him on the beach where he was found, and then just threw some rocks on top of him, and as far as he knows, he's still there today. The other thing was the Carnet Bay incident. He told me that over a third of the diamonds were recovered, and it was a gentleman. Have you got time for me to go on with this, or am I over time? It's very short, and I hold no guarantees of its authenticity. Okay, so don't come back and sue me. But allegedly, a gentleman by the name of Diamond Jack had decided to escape from the Japanese in his lugger, and he was sailing up the coast, and he saw the DC-3, and he went in, and in fact, the parcel hadn't been retrieved out of the aircraft, and it had come out, it was sloshing around in the aircraft. The other people had gone, and he picked the parcel up and took it with him. And I understand that he buried some of them in a tent which he pitched up in one of the lagoons that he went into. And he had a very large appetite for young Aboriginal ladies. They tell me that he needed about 5 a day to survive. And he paid them in diamonds. And many of the diamonds were recovered from young Aboriginal ladies. But they did not ever get the main lot. And one of the stories that I heard, again, was that when Jack ran out of money, a member of the police force always flew to Perth, came back, and Jack had a lot of money again. The story goes that when Jack died, they had a lot of trouble wiping the smile off his face, but they never found the rest of the diamonds. Thank you.